So hello and welcome, and a special welcome to our guests today, Helen Scales and Aaron John Gregory. Helen Scales is a British marine biologist, a broadcaster, and writer. Professor Scales swam all the way over here from Cambridge University, where she teaches marine biology and science writing, serves as scientific advisor to the marine conservation charity Sea Changers. You may know her from her BBC radio programs, such as Inside Science, Shared Planet, Outlook, and Weekend. Her previous books include Spirals in Time, The Secret Life and Curious Afterlife of Seashells, and Poseidon's Steed, The Story of Seahorses from Myth to Reality. Her new book, Eye of the Shoal, is an attempt to unhitch fish from their reputation as slimy, simple-minded creatures and reveal their mesmerizing and complex lives. The illustrator of the book is Aaron John Gregory. In addition to this book, Aaron's illustration work includes Godzilla, Rage Across Time for IDW Comics, Furry Logic, The Physics of Animal Life, and a book for the Smithsonian called Narwhal, Revealing an Arctic Legend, which accompanied the recent exhibit in DC. And Aaron also was the illustrator for one of Helen's previous books. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for coming along this afternoon, and for anyone who's listening online. My name is Helen Scales, and yeah, I'm a marine biologist. And just to clear things up right from the start, I often do get asked about my name. And just to be clear, it is my real name, but I'm not the only marine biologist with a cool name. I have a couple of other favorites. There's Teddy Gill. He was an American ichthyologist about 100 years ago. This guy's still around. Stephen Haddock actually is nearby where we are now in Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. He studies jellyfish, as you can see on his t-shirt. And this is one of my absolute favorite marine biologists, Marie Fish. We're going to come back to her later. It's a real pleasure to be here today, especially because this is the first opportunity I've had to appear alongside Aaron John Gregory, who has become a dear friend, but basically we've been working together for a couple of years now on my books. He's been bringing to life these wonderful creatures that I write about. So today is the first opportunity we've had to actually appear together and to talk about our different sides of this collaboration. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the book, tell you a little bit about what I've written about, go into a few of the stories I tell, and then we're going to hear from AJ about what he does to produce beautiful artwork. I should go back to that first slide, actually, because this is an image that sadly we were going to have on the front and the back cover of the book. This is the front cover. This is going to be the back cover, which is very beautiful. He has a t-shirt of it. But my publishers insisted on putting words on the back of my book instead of beautiful pictures. So this is what it should have looked like. So here we go. So yeah, Eye of the Shoal, the Fish Watcher's Guide to Life, the Oceans and Everything. The idea behind the book really is to bring to life this group of animals that I think kind of get a bit of a raw deal. They inhabit the oceans, which is the biggest living space on the planet. Something like 90% of the available biosphere, the living place for creatures to occupy, 90% of the space on our planet is ocean. And I would argue that the fish really reign supreme in this enormous realm, certainly amongst the vertebrates. So there are about 30,000 species of fish alive today, which is the same number as all of the other vertebrates put together. So 30,000 fish, but also 30,000 mammals, amphibians, birds, reptiles, all put together. So there's an awful lot of fish, and they get up to some incredible things down beneath the waves. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they do some pretty awesome stuff. So just to give you an idea of some of my favorites, a little rundown of some of my favorite fish. We have the Greenland shark. Recently discovered that this guy lives for 500 years, or can do. The longest lived vertebrate on the planet. Pretty incredible. They live under the Arctic ice. They hunt polar bears. Their hearts beat 5 times a minute. Pretty crazy things. And they're huge. They're about, I think, 8 meters long. So pretty huge things. Here's the world's smallest fish. It doesn't even have a common name. It's called Pedicrypsis progenetica. This is at full grown. They live in the peat swamps of Borneo. So fish can be very small, they can be huge and live for ages. I think these guys probably only live for a couple of weeks. And fish do some extraordinary things which we're just really beginning to learn about through technologies that are helping us to see into the depths and to track their lives. And one example I love to give is the bluefin tuna. Being here in California, it's quite a good example to give because it's kind of local, at least for part of its life. So the bluefin tuna, this particular species from the North Pacific, is born off the coast of Japan, and they feed off the coast of California. They come over here and they make this incredible journey. And we know about this because of we have satellite tracking technology which can now be small enough to stick a tag onto a fish and track where it goes. And here's just one example of one particular tuna that underwent this. It was born in Japan, underwent this migration to California. It then went back to Japan to spawn itself, and then the tag kept going and it came all the way back to California. So over the course of just 20 months, it migrated 40,000 kilometers, which is the equivalent of the entire circumference of the planet, which is amazing. So fish aren't just wandering around randomly through the oceans. They are undergoing journeys to find places they need to be for different resources. They're navigating in very smart ways, which we're still only just learning about how they make these great journeys and know where they're going. So really extraordinary things. But fish don't all swim huge distances. Some of them tend to stay put. Now, I want to show you a little video clip that I shot a couple of years ago. Hopefully it's going to work in Fiji. Let's try again. Here we go. So just a really simple little underwater camera. My photography skills aren't great. I was interested in this fish here, which is a triggerfish. And there was just lots of colourful fish swimming around. And I thought, well, this is all very lovely. And it did take me a little while to realise there's another fish in this picture that you can't have first seen. It's really not too clear in this picture anyway, but just to give you a hint, it's down here. And it's a stonefish. And again, I got closer and I took some more shots of it. It is a bit clearer on the monitor than on the screen, but just to give you a clue, there's an eye here and there is a mouth here. These are incredibly well camouflaged fish. It's one of those, I call the book The Fish Watcher's Guide to Life, the Oceans and Everything. 'Cause one thing I want to do is encourage people to go and watch fish and see them and appreciate them in the wild. And you get like super high points for spotting one of these guys because they're so hard to pick out. When you do, you're like, yeah, high five. I've seen the impossible to see fish. AJ, you've had some up-close encounters with these guys, haven't you?
So years ago, I used to own a tropical fish store. So fish have kind of been a part of my life. Which is interesting that Helen didn't notice it at first, which is a little dangerous because some of you might know this is actually one of the most lethal venomous fish on the planet. And if she were to, kind of rest you and put your hand down on that rock, these guys can kill you in like 5-10 minutes. There's no like anti-venom, there's no like, hey, let's get to the hospital or anything. Compared to scorpionfish and lionfish, which would ruin your day. If you had like an allergic reaction to them, could really ruin your day. These guys would take you out. And so when I own a tropical fish store, surprisingly, you could buy these as a pet. And so I had one on the front counter of the store in a tank about yay big, a cylinder, kind of hexagon, just enough space for a couple inches of gravel around him. And he would just bury himself in the gravel. And so customers would come up and they'd see this empty tube and, what's in that tank. When I owned the tropical fish store, I was pretty young, disclaimer, like 23, so I thought stuff like this was super cool. I'd be like, well, and I grab a feeder goldfish and I throw it in the tube and the gravel would just erupt. And these things would attack and hit their food in a matter of like milliseconds. I mean, it's gunshot quick. And goldfish would disappear, there'd be some scales, floating about, and then people would be blown away. And then I go ahead and tell them like, and by the way, if you were to put your hand in there, that thing would kill you. And just always, blow people's minds. But cool. Yeah, he's a pretty cool fish. Good
so they're ambush hunters, which is really cool. Like you say, they hide and then basically want to just grab the food that comes close to them, whether it's a goldfish in their tank or one of those fish swimming around. So a completely different strategy to those tuna, which are swimming miles and miles and miles to find their food. These guys just sit and wait. So I guess my point is that fish just have very different strategies to survive and thrive in the oceans, to find their food and get the stuff they need. And they do some pretty wacky stuff. So, a couple of things that I'm trying to do in the book is bust some of the really ingrained myths that we have about fish, which I do think puts a barrier between us and them in terms of understanding them as wildlife. I want people to appreciate these things as beautiful, fascinating creatures, and not just as food or as these, slimy, smelly, boring things. And I think this is one reason why we do kind of have this distance with fish compared to other vertebrates with birds and mammals, is this idea that they have really terrible memories. Like the 3-second memory thing, I don't know if you've come across this, or maybe 7 seconds for a goldfish, like, he's swimming around his bowl and, oh, it's okay, I don't remember what happened last time round. Like, this is really deeply ingrained, not just in the kind of public consciousness, but within science as well. Like, it's taken scientists a long time to figure out, actually, even though fish have got reasonably small brains to their body size, that doesn't rule out them actually having signs of what we might consider to be higher intelligence and the ability to solve problems, to memorize things, and do stuff that maybe at first we wouldn't expect. So I've got a couple of examples of fish that I think help to bust this myth about them being kind of small-minded, kind of dumb creatures. One of them is this guy, the frill fin Goby. These guys live in the Gulf of Mexico on the rocky shore. They inhabit kind of shallow intertidal pools. And what these guys do is when the tide is high, they will swim around. They're only little fish, probably about yay big. They'll swim around and look at the environment around them and basically memorize the shape of the seabed. And they're working out that when the sea level drops, when the tide goes out, they'll know where the pockets of water will remain, where the pools are going to form. And this could save their life. And I'm going to explain this with some really high-tech illustrations that I did. Unfortunately, I didn't get AJ to do these ones. So no expense has been spared at all with this illustration that I made of the leaping gobies. So here we go. So the sea level is coming down. We've got our goby in the blue fish here, and our predator is this lovely octopus. So the tide's coming down, and what he doesn't want to do is end up in a pool stuck with a predator. So what does he do? So he can jump to safety, but he needs to know which way to jump. He doesn't want to jump out on land. That would be pretty bad for him, but basically because they've memorized the shape of their environment, they know exactly the right direction and the distance to jump, and they will do that when they need to, and they will get away to safety. Which is pretty cool. And even more cool is the fact that the scientists who studied this then thought, well, we'll take them away for a bit and see what happens. So they've collected these fish up, kept them in a kind of blank aquarium tank for a couple of weeks, I think maybe up to a month, put them back into their natural environment, and lo and behold, they still remember what to do. And as soon as they get stuck in a wrong pool with a predator, they know where to go and how to jump to get this kind of exit route to save their skin. So, these guys definitely are not just, they definitely have longer than the 3-second memory, and they have this spatial map in their heads of what's going on. And you can see how this has evolved as a survival strategy so that they don't end up being octopus food. Now, another of my favorite examples of a fish that really shows us it's got more smarts than you might imagine are the cleaner wrasse. Now, these aren't particularly good pictures. These are my photos. Again, I'm not a very good photographer yet, but it's basically this stripy little thing, short guy in the front on the left-hand side, black and white. And then this guy on the right-hand side, I was taking a picture of this big white fish with black stripes and didn't even realize that behind was another fish being cleaned. So the cleaner wrasse, you find them on coral reefs, and they play a really important role in the ecosystem because they pick off parasites and dead skin from other fish. And in fact, we've shown that if you take cleaner wrasse away from an area of coral reef, the fish basically get pretty sick. They suffer from more diseases and they start getting pretty sick. So they need this service to have all these nasty bits and pieces taken off of them. It isn't just fish that get cleaned, though. I'm going to show you a little video of these guys are just kind of programmed to clean whatever comes along. So you can have your teeth done if you want. Hopefully they're not finding any parasites in there, but I'm not sure about that. So cleaner wrasse will just clean whatever they come across. And what they're after mainly are these things called nathiad isopods. They're kind of like ticks of the sea. They latch onto fish, suck their blood for a couple of hours, and then drop off. Fish would much rather have them picked off by a cleaner wrasse. But the wrasse, they will eat thousands of these things a day. They are constantly feeding. There are fish coming to their cleaning stations, hundreds of them each day, and they are stuffing themselves with isopods, with these parasites. And for a wrasse, actually what they would rather do, if they can get away with it, is not eat the isopods, but take a nice bite of skin, maybe the flesh and the mucus on the outside of a fish. Especially on coral reefs, the slime that fish are covered in is actually full of sunscreen, which helps stop them from getting sunburned. It's pretty important in this sunny environment. They don't make that sunscreen themselves. They have to get it in their food from bacteria in their food, or you can lick it off another fish. But the cleaner wrasse know that there's only certain times when they can get away with cheating, basically, because a fish would rather not have to make, heal a little bite that it's got from this cleaner wrasse. It really just wants a good service if it's having its parasites removed. But this is where we really start to see the smarts of these little fish coming out. And it's through scientists who've been studying these things for the last 10 years or so, and spending hours and hours and hours watching cleaner wrasse in the wild and also in laboratories. And they're showing that these guys have got a really smart way of figuring out how they should behave. And they will memorize all of the clients that come to their cleaning station, know exactly which one's which. They will be able to distinguish between different species. So simplistically, one of the first things they will figure out is, well, is it a herbivore or a predator? If it's a fairly harmless herbivore, like this surgeonfish on the left-hand side, then it can occasionally get away with a bit of cheating because there's not too much harm done. But if it is a predator, like this moray eel on the right-hand side, you better behave pretty good because it's pretty extraordinary that this fish could climb into the mouth of a predator and not just get eaten. There's this truce that is struck in the cleaning station that only happens in this very special place. Anywhere else on the reef, and that moray eel will just eat that wrasse straight up. But somehow they maintain this kind of agreement that that's not going to happen. And it partly happens because the wrasse behaves really well, it doesn't cheat. And it also knows that it can basically kind of manipulate that other fish by giving it a massage, essentially. So they will rub themselves, their fins, over the body of the bigger fish. And studies have shown that the fish actually enjoy this. Well, certainly their stress hormones drop and they seem to relax. But you can interpret that as enjoyment if you like. It's possible even that some of these fish come to get cleaned so often, and they'll come like many, many times a day. Because it feels nice, and they do seem to have this kind of, they shiver and they stop and they'll just sort of be in this trance as this little fish flicks over its body, rubbing and massaging. And that's also what the wrasse will do if they cheat. So we kind of know that it is almost apologizing. So say it's cleaning a herbivore, which isn't going to eat it, and also it will look and see who else is around. So if there's a big long queue of other fish waiting, they tend to be pretty well behaved because they know that those other fish could just swim off and go get cleaned someplace else. And they rely on that. They do rely on fish coming to be cleaned up for their food. But if the queue is kind of short, there's not too many people, other fish waiting, and if it's a herbivore, then yeah, they'll try and cheat and take some slime. But they will apologize and they will immediately kind of rub and smooth over the fish and sort of say, I'm sorry, don't swim off, please don't swim off. And and usually it works and they kind of settle down and they're okay. So the cleaner wrasse, and there's lots of other aspects of their lives that are really surprising. They often operate in pairs, so a male and a female will clean together. And the male has the female totally kind of controlled because she must never cheat. Because if she cheats and eats too much mucus and grows too big, she could change sex, turn into a male, and steal his territory. Because these are one of the sex-changing species of fish that we have. And he really doesn't want his partner to end up kind of grabbing his territory. So if he sees her cheating, he is mean to her and will basically kind of chase her and bite her because he knows this is really bad. So the female has to sort of, if she's with him, she has to behave. So there's loads of crazy things going on in their lives. And so basically the cleaner wrasse is showing us that despite their small size and their small brains, they have evolved the need to have quite complex social lives, to be able to communicate, to understand that there's different types of fish and to change and tailor their services according to what's going on around them. And those are all things that maybe we wouldn't have expected not so long ago, that fish could lead such kind of nuanced lives. It's not just a hardwired behavior, this is responding and solving problems in really kind of smart ways. So that is the cleaner wrasse. Okay, I'm going to move on to another myth that we get in the fish world, and I'm going to come back to my favourite lady, marine fish. So another idea that has kind of been around for a long time is that fish are silent and that they don't make any sounds. I remember as a kid reading books, And if there were lots of animals in the books, I could do the noises. I could do the cows and the sheep and the ducks. But whenever there was a fish in the picture, I was kind of stumped. What noise does the fish make? It's pretty tricky. And we kind of assume that they don't make any sounds, but they actually do. And this lady got involved in understanding more about the sounds of fish. And it was after the Second World War. And the US Navy were actually the ones who were interested in knowing about fish sounds. Because the war effort had been conducted, quite a lot of it had been conducted underwater. There were submarines for the first time. Hydrophones had been invented to listen for enemy warcraft. Only half the time all they could hear was just sounds of animals underwater, and it was really getting in the way. So for the next 20 years after the Second World War, Marie Fish at the University of Rhode Island was funded by the US Navy to basically go out and record the voices of fish, to figure out when are they noisy, what species make these sounds, where are they, to try and kind of listen through this cacophony of sounds they were making. So that's what she did. She was apparently given a Chevrolet wagon as her kind of fish listening station. She would drive around the coast of Maine and New England, and this was packed out with equipment, the latest hydrophones, miles of cables, walkie-talkies, all sorts of really cool stuff. I don't have a picture of what that looked like, but I kind of imagine it looked a bit like this, only she wasn't looking to bust ghosts. She was trying to find fish to record their voices. And she did. She recorded hundreds of different fish voices. And I'm actually going to play a couple of for you now, because these are available on archives online, just to give you an idea of these are the sorts of sounds that fish make. No prizes for guessing how this one got its name. This is the grunt. It's quite loud, sorry. Yep, so there we go, a grunting fish. There is this guy. Again, no prizes for guessing the name. Cool. It's nice. Hang on a second, the second one is good. Ooh, you can't resist that. That's an amazing sound. That's a male croaker talking to a female, and I can see, how they respond to that. We've got a sea robin as well. Kind of sounds like it's barking. Amazing sounds. So there we go. So fish make loads of sounds, and there's hundreds of fish that she recorded and analysed their different sounds they were making. And we now know that fish make sounds for all sorts of different reasons. This is a damselfish, another fish from a coral reef. They are very angry, territorial fish, and if you come close to they farm seaweed on the reef, and if you come close to their little territory, they will try and scare you off, even if you're a human scuba diver. And they will chatter their teeth together and make this drumming sound, and you can hear it in the water, and they'll swim at you and try and scare you off. Other fish will make sounds to court each other, to sort of attract partners during fights. So piranhas have at least 3 different calls, we think, that they use at different points of their fights. When it's the beginning of a fight and they're just kind of checking each other out. In the middle of a fight, there'll be a different sound, and then the victor has a kind of victory kind of chant that it shouts out and says, like, I win, you lose, don't come back. They make the sounds in various different ways. So the grunt is grinding its second set of teeth together. A lot of fish have a second set of teeth at the back of their throats called the pharyngeal teeth. Here's a 3D printed version of these guys. I think a brilliant use of 3D printing. And they grind their teeth together to make those kind of grunting sounds. The other thing fish do is use an organ in their body called the swim bladder, which we actually think evolved from lungs, that fish did evolve lungs quite early on and then secondarily evolved this organ, which they use primarily as a flotation device to stop them from sinking underwater, but also to make sounds. So they do this in lots of different ways. I'm going to show you one more video clip of a noisy fish. This is a toadfish making some sounds, which is pretty dramatic. And what that fish is doing is it has a muscle on the outside of its swim bladder, and it's vibrating that balloon to make those sounds. Triggerfish, which we showed in that video earlier, they will drum their fins against their swim bladder to kind of use it as a drum skin, which is pretty cool. And then I always have to give this example, especially when I'm talking to kids. So this is the herring, which let little bubbles of gas out of their swim bladders. They fill their swim bladders up from their mouths. There's a direct connection through to that from the air, but they let out these bubbles at night time to kind of coordinate their shoaling, so they know where they are in the shoal, and it's dark, and they let small bubbles out, which will make a little sound, but it comes out of their bums. And the scientists who discovered this called it the fast repetitive tick, and I'm not kidding. Here's the science paper that it came from, and it's down there. So that one's quite fun. So fish make sounds sounds for all sorts of reasons. They are much more sonic than we ever thought they were, and we're still understanding how this kind of fits into their ecology and how they're using sound as an important resource that they have available to communicate with each other. Okay, so we've had sound, we've had fish smarts and brains, which are things that we sort of don't necessarily think much of in the fish world. The book also, I try to address and look at some of the aspects of fish lives that are unique to the fish and the things that they do that you really don't see in other groups of animals, certainly in other groups of vertebrates. And there are some things that fish are just really, really good at and have just extraordinary abilities that nothing else really has. And one of those things is bioluminescence, the ability to make light. There are 1,500 species of fish that we know of at the moment that have this ability to make light. And there's things like the flashlight fish here, which has basically has like headlights on the front of it to see through the dark. There's the anglerfish. If any of you have seen that lovely documentary Finding Nemo, I think you should be familiar with anglerfish and the fact that they have this lure at the front of their head which dangles down and then attracts food into their big mouth. This picture actually comes from, just recently taken from a piece of footage off the coast of the Azores in the middle of the Pacific, the islands, down about 800 meters. And I believe it's one of the first pieces of footage showing live female anglerfish, which are the big ones that you can see, but with a male trailing along behind her. Actually, if you can just make out here, this is like sticking down from her is the degenerative tiny male who basically is a parasite and kind of grabs onto her, and his skin will fuse with hers and he'll just drag around with her, and then she will use him when she needs to. So that's pretty cool. So that's the first time we've seen that, and also I think hopefully you can just make out that they've got this kind of net of feelers, like tentacles coming out, which may also be bioluminescent. They're kind of hard to see in the picture, so we're not sure. But they seem to have, maybe they work a bit like cat's whiskers. They're sensing things in the water around them. So fish are very bioluminescent. Here's a diagram of the fish family tree. And 1,500 species, but they're dotted all through the evolutionary tree. We think maybe on 30 separate occasions fish have evolved to glow in the dark. This is something that just keeps happening. And it's an example, I think, of showing that fish, these 30,000 species, are really this wonderful experiment in evolution and in life. And we can understand more about bigger questions of evolution and the natural world through the fish. And things like this. So the fact that it's so common to evolve bioluminescence in fish is not a big, difficult question to answer. It's really dark down there. We're talking about fish that live mostly down in what we call the midnight zone, beyond 1,000 meters, down 3,000 feet, where no sunlight reaches. So it makes sense that if there's no light around, then making your own light is super useful for seeing through the dark, for attracting food, for attracting mates, and all those kinds of things. So, this is something the fish have returned to again and again. They aren't all in the midnight zone, I should say. There are some that live a little bit higher up in what we call the twilight zone. So this is between about 200 meters, so 600 feet, down into the midnight zone. And this is where we get just mostly really dark blue light. All the other wavelengths of light have been absorbed by water, leaving the short wavelength blue light. It's basically why the oceans are blue, because that's the light that penetrates the deepest. And one of the creatures that lives down there is this guy, the velvet belly lantern shark, a fully grown shark that you could hold in the palm of your hand, which is pretty cool. And it has blue bioluminescence all across its belly. And the reason it does that is so that it can hide in this area, the twilight zone. Because imagine if you're down there, basically looking up towards the surface, you would see this deep, beautiful, deep blue light. Similar to if you stepped out at twilight out on land and you look up and you see this dark blue sky. And then if a bat or a bird flew overhead, you'd see its dark silhouette. And if you were a predator, you'd think, aha, there's my food. Same thing happens in the deep ocean, in the twilight zone. If a bunch of fish swim by and the predator sees those shadows, they know what to aim for. But of course, bioluminescence helps to get around that. And it helps these fish to hide in plain sight. Now, lots of fish do this. They have maybe lines of bioluminescence down their bellies to kind of break up their silhouettes. They don't look so much like fish. Or you get something like the velvet belly lantern shark, which just match entire, the whole, they cover their entire bellies with blue light that matches the light around them, and they can adjust the intensity of that light depending on where they are in the water column. So it's like a cloak of invisibility, which is really quite awesome. Just a quick one if you're interested to know how bioluminescence actually works. half of the fish basically have chemicals that they have genes that produce chemicals in their bodies that produce this light. We generically call one of the molecules luciferin. It's actually a whole bunch of different things it can be, but that's the name it's come up with. And an enzyme called luciferase. Again, it could be different things. But basically, it's an oxygenation reaction. It speeds up, so luciferase speeds up a reaction in the luciferin with oxygen, and the outcome is photons of light. So about half the fish have these genes, and that's what happens. And half of them have bacteria that are bioluminescent, and they have organs in their body where they kind of nurture those bacteria and make light that way. And this, I think, has to be the most ingenious example of a bioluminescent fish, the illuminated net devil, because it does both. It has both in its lure sticking up from its head. She has bacteria in this kind of bulb at the end. And she's got this beautiful beard down at the bottom, which is a chemical reaction. So she's evolved bioluminescence twice within the same fish, which is just extraordinary and wonderful. So there we go. So bioluminescence doesn't happen in any other vertebrates. Fish are the only ones that do it, and my goodness, they do it. And it's just one example, I think, of some of the stuff that fish do that's quite surprising. But it suits them perfectly to this extraordinary world they live in, this deep, dark ocean, deep blue ocean that's so different from us and the world that we know out on land. So that's about all I'm going to talk about. And it brings me to a brilliant point where I can hand over to AJ, because I want to introduce you to some of the beautiful artwork that he's done. So not only have we got the front cover, but for each chapter, AJ has produced us a full-page illustration to go with the subject matter of the chapter. And from my perspective, the process of how this happened and how this artwork came to be was quite a simple one. I would write my chapter. I would decide what the chapter was about. I would gather ideas of the key characters in that chapter. So this is the chapter about bioluminescence, and there's lots of awesome deep sea fish. And then I would send a list of fish names, write an email from Cambridge in Britain and ping them over the ocean to California. And then some time later, some beautiful artwork appears in my inbox. And that's about all I know about the whole process. So I would love to hand over to AJ to maybe tell us a bit more about the process from your point of view, because I imagine it's a little bit more involved than the magic box that you seem to be from my point of view.
A little bit more involved. But let's see, where's your clicker? Here we go.
Oh, sorry, I left it on the side there.
So this is one, I think one of our favorite drawings in the book. I love deep sea fish, so I tore into this one with a lot of enthusiasm. But yeah, the process for this would basically be Helen would send me an email with a list of species this long. And I think I'd like to have all these in the drawing. And then I've got to come up with a way to make that look, natural, but kind of not so natural, because obviously this isn't necessarily what the deep sea ocean looks like. This is kind of a party going on. And I think in particular one, it was pretty challenging because you wanted to show the boat that ties in with the original researcher who discovered a lot of these species, and I think late 1800s or mid?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So I had to draw, my little version of a period boat from that time. And then you had the idea of wanting a rope to come down. And so we're kind of looking up, we're seeing the boat, we're seeing the rope and all these different species. And that's quite something to wrap my head around as a designer and illustrator. Plus you had your mile-long list. But I even added some to this. But so usually what I do is I start out with just some really basic kind of rough thumbs like this. And I start feeling it out. Actually, this is where I start. So really simple, just sketching in real quick. But with this drawing, I pretty much had it from the very get-go, the idea, like how this could go down was in my head. Refined it a bit here. I think I moved the lantern shark over and kind of puzzled, the sharks in there. And then I would so I wouldn't show them that, because any illustrator will tell you never show them your thumbnails, because the editors and the authors and everyone else would start freaking out, like, oh boy, I don't know, dude, if you were cut out for the job. And every pro illustrator will draw that sloppy in the first stages. So you don't want to show that, but this is, tightened up a bit. So this is the rough I would send over, and everybody would, you'd have your critiques and whatnot. I managed to get the boat in there and showed the rope and the kind of illusion of maybe we're looking at a trail of animals going up to the boat, even through some mountains in there, to show the kind of, because a lot of this was done pretty far up north, right? The research.
All around the world, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like this global journey. But I do love the fact you have the mountains in, because I think there's a lot of classic images of the time of here's the boat and the sort of the scenery.
Right.
Like they would never have seen all of this, but I feel like that top bit is.
I think I must have been channeling. I don't know if any of you watched the show The Terror, but I had read that book not long ago. But it's basically a British expedition. They go up to the Arctic, Nice. And so I was thinking, and it was that same time period. So I'm like, oh well, you got to have the Arctic, and there's some kind of mountains. But anyways. Everything here she wanted, except for this one. This is a ninja lantern shark. Let's see if we can get to the real thing. And that's a really cool species. Maybe you guys have heard of it. It was all over the internet last year. My friend Vicky Vasquez, who's a local shark researcher, discovered it. And her young nephew, I believe, helped her name it, hence the ninja lantern shark. It's an all-black shark, and it's bioluminescent all the way down. So I'm like, oh, we got to include that. That's super cool. And then we got a cookie cutter, which is the super weird, scary shark that will latch onto whales and kind of twist and carve out a perfect, like a cookie cutter chunk of flesh. Whales, dolphins, even other sharks, they're pretty nasty. They're only about this big, but they had teeth that's like something out of a horror movie. Really wild. Viperfish, dragonfish. This is called a loose jaw, because his whole bottom jaw just completely comes out, and you can see right through it. It's just like an appendage, but lined with super little needle teeth. This is one of my favorite and strangest fish, and he was kind of making the rounds on the internet, I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago.
And that was here too, right? That was Monterey Bay, right?
Yeah. Actually, I think it was Mbari, who we're going to go talk to next week, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. This fish has developed the ability, so these two little slits here are its actual eyelids. It's developed the ability to pop its eyes back out from its eyelids and look straight up through its translucent skull. That way you can see prey and or predators coming at it from above. So this whole top dome is just clear. It's like the creepiest thing ever. And I had to kind of figure out how to draw that in a black and white ink drawing. But yeah, so this was one of our favorites. Compositionally, as an artist, you try to just fit everything in with the fluid motion. I like to add some natural interactive elements. This guy's obviously chasing these guys. This dude's just trying to be part of the party, which personality-wise, I also try to kind of capture their personality. So the anglerfish is just like, hey guys, don't forget about me. And then the sharks are kind of the rock stars. They're up top. I forget the species name of this little dude.
Are they the lantern?
Not the lantern, but it's the most prolific.
Yeah.
Like one of the most prolific. Yeah.
Is it bristlemouths? Yeah.
I think so.
I could find out.
I'll quiz you on that. Oops, that's you.
That's...
So that was a lot of fun. And then one of the ways that we found each other is I own a t-shirt company called Cotton Crustacean, which originally I started with the focus on prehistoric marine animals. Long story super short, did a Kickstarter to launch the thing. One of the rewards was if you pay X amount of money, you get to pick the animal, as long as it's aquatic or prehistoric. That way I could maybe get some cool dinosaurs in there if somebody picked it. I would draw that animal, I would include it in the t-shirt line, and you'd get the original art. This one guy went down to an aquarium with his son. He was a fan of what I was doing before, so he knew of me, really wanted to support. He went down to an aquarium with his son to go see the Argonaut octopus that was washing up, kind of down, not the Long Beach aquarium, but there's another little aquarium down there. I think it's called the Cabrillo Aquarium. And so he went down there and he did the Kickstarter reward. And, again, like when I came up with that idea, I was hoping people to be like, yeah, mosasaur and chronosaurus and all really cool, big, toothy things. And he says, well, I want an Argonaut, which is about, at the largest, maybe this big. Usually they're really small. They're also called paper nautiluses, because what it is, it's the only octopus that makes a shell alive today. The female does it, excretes it from the palms of her hands, and it's like super paper thin. It's like an eggshell. And so I'm like, oh, all right, so I got to do that. And I ended up doing the drawing. It's become my most popular shirt. I cannot keep them in stock. And if you Google the Argonaut octopus, it is like the third or fourth image in the top row, even with just other photographs and whatnot. It's definitely the first illustration you'll find online. And so when she was writing Spirals in Time, which she talks about the Argonaut octopus in, she was, I think you were Googling literally images of Argonaut octopuses, came across my drawing, tracked me down through whatever websites, hit me up, and here we are now in our second book. But originally, my whole focus was giant monstrous fish like this. And so when she said I have a chapter with all these guys in there, I was stoked. And then she sent me the list of species, and it was this long.
Sorry.
So again, I have to sit there and think, well, how do we add all these guys in there and make it kind of fun and not have it just so overwhelming? And the other main thing here with prehistoric animals, which is usually the case, when people talk about dinosaurs, they show like T-Rex and Stegosaurus hanging out. But those two animals are 70 million years apart. They never knew each other. The same with the prehistoric fish and inverts and whatnot. 250, almost 300 million years of these guys before dinosaurs. So when we're talking about species like up here, this is the Bothrielapis, that bony guy way up there. The go-go fish, this little guy found on the go-go reef in Australia. They're from the Devonian era, so we're talking 350-ish, almost 400 million years ago, around there. Part of a family of fish that are long gone, but they were called placoderms. And they were usually armored in the first half, like a little tank, and then their soft bodies would be out, behind them. These dudes were all any range, maybe at the biggest about this big, fresh in salt water, would eat scum and stuff on the bottom. But they had the rock star big cousin, which is the Dunkleosteus, which is now becoming more and more popular in movies and books and video games and whatnot. Basically the size of a school bus with a head like a snapping turtle. So we had to have them in there. I think you had the idea of them fighting. So I got this guy doing the cheap shot, biting them.
And I should say that's because we found evidence that they did fight. I
Right.
think there's fossils with clearly injuries that could only have been inflicted by another Dunkleosteus.
Right, that would have fit the jaws.
We have
of,
a good kind of reason for doing that.
I mean, and again, imagine the skulls we find of these guys are about this wide, and it's not even necessarily teeth. It's like they're armored kind of bone exoskull formed into the wedges of the plates, like a turtle would be, almost like a bird beak. God knows how heavy, about the size of a bus. So I sell a lot of shirts with these guys on, as you can imagine. Kids love this kind of stuff. But then on your list, you had something I can't even really pronounce at the moment. We were trying to figure out how to say it last night.
I can have a look at the book.
Harpofumagator, I think.
Hang on a second.
It's this little
Because
tiny
I
thing
also
right here.
made sure at the back of the book there's a key, so we know what they all are,
Yeah.
because this is very important to me. It is a Harpagofututor.
Yes.
Harpagofututor, that little dude with the,
And so, of course, I'd never
Yeah.
heard of that, and I go online to look it up, and there's maybe 3 sketches of one drawn, and the worst fossil print you would never be able to tell that it looked like this. And so, as a scientific illustrator, when you come across that, you kind of have to base your stuff both off of whatever published drawings there are out there and findings. I think 1 or even 2 of those 3 drawings weren't even professional. So there was 1 true professional scientific illustration of it. So I knew the layout, the fins, these little tiny dudes. And obviously when you draw it that small, I'm not going to get that detailed anyway. So he ends up kind of looking like a little Martian guy.
I'm amazed that you didn't just say no.
Yeah.
Just, no, we can't do that, but it's cool.
I just liked his name so much, I wanted to include him. But then these guys are all kind of rock star prehistoric sharks. This is the Stephacanthus. And why he's known is because he has this kind of radar dish, weird dorsal fin that has spikes on it. Pretty small shark, about the size of a gray reef shark. This is the Edustus giganteus, and he's from the Carboniferous period. So when the planet was kind of overrun with insects, super lush forests, pretty much nothing else really cruising around. It was like the time of the insects. The ocean, we had these dudes. and they had a single row of teeth in their upper and lower jaw that would come down like scissors. And they were bigger than an average modern great white shark, about 25 feet long. So, you know, almost the length, if not the length of this room going this way. So he's super cool, but all we have in the fossil record are these guys right here, just the actual jaw bones. So with sharks, because they're not an actual skeletal fish, they're not a bony fish, skeletons are made of cartilage, it doesn't fossilize hardly at all. And so we have to kind of guesstimate, you know, and base them off of more prehistoric sharks that are alive today that we know have been around because we found their teeth and whatnot in the fossil record. So in the bay, we have 7-gill sharks. It's a super prehistoric shark because we have found fossils of the exact teeth from 200 million years ago. And then this dude, who doesn't necessarily get the limelight like his other buddies here, has become one of the biggest rock stars. It's called the helicoprion. And his bottom jaw was basically like, this is what we would find. It's a tooth whorl. It's just a single row of teeth, like a saw blade. And for 100+ years, ichthyologists and paleontologists would try to figure out where that tooth whorl would go. And so there's all these amazing ancient ichthyology drawings of that tooth whorl on his head, on his butt, on his tail, as a dorsal fin, like side saw fins, you know, sideways, all sorts of crazy stuff. And it's really only, much to my disappointment, when I started my t-shirt company in the last 5 years, we've kind of got it nailed down that it's stuck in the lower jaw. It would actually have molars in the top and the saw would come up. And there's just enough kind of cheekbones left in, I forget what museum had it, but they did a 3D, you know, recreation of it, and it all fit together like a puzzle piece. The reason why I say it was my disappointment is because when I started caught in crustacean, I drew the helicoprion with the old school way, which is almost like the bottom jaw was like a whip that came around and twirled around like that. And it was such a common way to depict that it's like in Jurassic Park video games and other stuff. So I start my t-shirt company, do the Kickstarter. I make 120 helicoprion shirts with the kind of whip jaw. 3 months later, the latest findings come out, and they're like, hey, by the way, it's a buzzsaw in the jaw. And it's not even this like giant monstrous great white looking thing. It's kind of a giant ratfish, which is a relative of the sharks. It's cartilaginous. They're also called ghost sharks. Kind of like a Dumbo looking elephant of a little mini shark. But I like to draw them still with a little more, you know, panache. This is the Leetsiichthyes, if I'm saying that right. Like the biggest bony fish ever. Yep. Bigger than his school bus. I mean, just 45, I think maybe 50 feet, around there. Filter feeder, just super slow, would cruise around in packs. And he was more around in the Mesozoic. So if I'm remembering right, late Triassic maybe, around there.
Something like that. Yeah, much more recently. Yeah. Cool.
Luckily, there's no paleontologists in the crowd.
Hopefully not.
Like,
Like,
well.
characters.
Yeah. So, and the same deal. Here's how I figured all that out. Just working out the different things, figuring out who I wanted to have the focus on. This is the first sketch here, where I was trying to have the big ol' Dunkleosteus in there, but it got a little crowded, got more of a figure S. And with any composition, what I'm trying to do is I'm also trying to guide the eye through the piece. So with these roughs, you know, I had pretty much nailed that and figured that out. But yeah, so there's that. And I'll show you one more. This was also a favorite of ours. So there's the final of this one. What's the name of this chapter?
It's The View from the Deep.
View from the Deep. So Helen gave me a list of fish, again, a mile long, most of them freshwater, but from all over the world, and then one saltwater. Being an aquarium guy, having owned a fish store and whatnot, we get really particular about mixing fish from different parts of the world, because if you're doing that, you're just doing it just to have a fancy looking fish tank. You're not actually trying to create a biotope, an accurate representation. So we have Amazon tanks, we have Asian river tanks, we have African Rift Lake cichlid tanks. So she gave me this list of all these different species, and at first I was like, oh, we can't do that. You kidding me? But I gave in, and so originally this was a hagfish. Believe it or not, this thing is not a branch. That is a pretty disgusting fish called the hagfish, which is slimy and kind of brainless, and maybe deserves that reputation that you're trying to break with fish. There was an image going around on the internet, I believe, was it this guy, where the car was carrying like a slew of these in a big bin in its back. And then I think the car got in an accident or the thing tipped over. And what these guys do is they secrete this totally nasty slime kind of substance. And you can take one and put it in a bucket and it would fill the bucket with that slime. It could generate that much kind of this saliva, like ectoplasm looking, Ghostbusters kind of, substance. Anyway, so there's this car, it's carrying a whole giant like plastic bin, probably had like 300 of them. And the slime completely just took over the car. It exploded all over, it was all over the street, it was all over the car. It had looked like something out of Ghostbusters, like there's something that just came in and slimed it. Problem is, I liked having him in there. He's a saltwater, and I'll mix fish from different parts of the world, but I won't mix a saltwater fish with a freshwater fish because my reputation's on the line here. So hagfish got taken out. But what we have is some really big, super strange freshwater fish. If you've been to Cal Academy in Golden Gate Park, there's a big tank full of the alligator gar. It's one of my favorite. And they get ginormous, 10, 12 feet. You would find them in actually rather shallow rivers and whatnot in, like, say, Texas. We'll find them in the Mississippi, but they're really common in Texas. Super slow moving. They're becoming almost endangered because obviously in Texas, this would be a thing. People like to go hunt them with bows and arrows. So these big guys come up, without a care in the world, up to the surface, and dudes come out on boats, and they pluck them. So it's
crazy.
Yeah, and it actually has a rope on the arrow, so they're fishing with the actual arrow. So populations are being depleted pretty quick, which is a tragedy. But they're not quite on the endangered list yet, I don't think. But I love those guys. You can see them at the California Academy of Sciences. Big white sturgeon. We would get these right here in the bay. I grew up in Sacramento. You would get these in the Delta and the Sacramento River. They're anadromous, right? Is the right word to say that? Freshwater and salt. They can kind of go back and forth. Also would get huge for a long time in Lake Tahoe. There was rumor of a Tahoe's own sea monster. They called it Tessie, I believe. And then, eventually somebody caught like a 15-foot one of these. It was just an absolute monster. Caviar, I guess they're probably pretty good eating. They're definitely, there's a fishery for them. A good place to see these if you go to Aquarium of the Bay, down by Pier 39, which I know is like Pier 39. But there is a legitimate little aquarium there called Aquarium of the Bay where I used to work as a scuba diver. And we have a huge population of these in the big tunnel tanks, and they're pretty impressive. They're like very prehistoric animal, right? Around since the dinosaurs. And then these guys, the paddle fish, you'd find like in Missouri, based in the northern states, out in the rivers and lakes. There's a couple different quarries that have been populated with them that divers will go just to see them. It's a very strange, fairly large fish, kind of built like a shark in a way, even though it is totally a freshwater bony fish. And then it has this really large, weird paddle nose that comes out. They, I do think, are on the endangered list. Which sucks. Their habitats are getting wiped out by pollution and damming of the rivers and whatnot. And then we have these guys, the snakehead, which you may have heard of because they are super evasive and are getting into lakes and rivers everywhere, and they eat everything. And they're yay big. If you've watched River Monsters, there's a great episode where that guy goes in and tries to find them. He gets bit by one, and they're hyper aggressive. And they were just kind of taken over. Don't know why they were introduced or how they got into, especially up here in North America. We were laughing with this fish because I call it a biker. And
I thought it was Bashir.
Bashir, yeah.
Oops.
At least in the California aquarium trade, we call them bikers.
You're probably right.
And it's an African fish, right? And my cool story about that is when I had my fish store, I'd go to these tropical fish wholesalers, which are big, damp, kind of dank warehouses with just rows and rows and rows of aquariums. And that's where the fish stores would go to buy our fish and take it back to the fish store and sell them to you guys. A lot of these places have drainage canals that the tanks could just easily be overflowed. Nobody would worry about water damage or anything. Concrete floors, drainage canals with openings in them. And what would happen a lot is these guys would get out of the tanks, get into the drainage canals, not get washed out. They would hang around, eat whatever else comes down there, get really big. And so sometimes you'd be at the wholesaler picking up your fish and you'd see something go down these pipelines, with the open, where it was open. And it was these bikers that were just like loving life, living in this Super Mario tube world. So they're cool. They're a very popular aquarium fish. And then this guy is the lamprey, which is probably one of the most disgusting.
They're parasites as well, right?
Parasites, also fresh and salt water, back and forth. You'd find them in the American River and the Delta, other freshwater rivers, obviously, but also out in the ocean. And they like to latch on with this crazy circular mouth that's just lined with teeth, and kind of like the cookie cutter shark, suck a chunk out, or at least just kind of draw blood and protein from the animal until they could shake them. When salmon are coming up the stream to breed, lampreys are jumping on those guys and hitching a ride. And then last but not least, these guys are, Texas, Sacramento, Missouri, Africa, everywhere. And then she wanted African cichlids, which are little super colorful fish that live in the rift lakes of Africa. And also there's cichlids in the western rivers of Africa. But there are certain lakes like Lake Malawi where the water is pretty clear. And there are millions and millions of these almost tropical color, like saltwater fish. Little guys called African cichlids, all sorts of different color types, stripes and spots, super neon blues and reds and greens. Some of the most beautiful freshwater fish in the world, just swimming around in the rocky reefs. It would make for amazing scuba diving, but there's also hippos and crocodiles and God knows what else. So African tigerfish, all sorts of things that would just ruin your day. But as a kid, the reason why these are my favorite, very popular aquarium fish. If you get into keeping freshwater tanks, often you would kind of cut your teeth on these guys because they are so colorful and they breed and whatnot. So when I was a kid getting into aquariums, I'd be like 9 years old, get on my BMX bike, go down to the local fish store with like a jar of like dimes and nickels, and I would buy one of these fish, bring it home. They're hyper aggressive, so I'd throw it, not really knowing that yet, learning about all this stuff, throw it in my tank of tetras and other kind of angelfish and watch it just massacre everybody. So I'd end up with this one fish that would just dominate, and then I'd go, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna keep African cichlids now. So I'd go get more, and with every bag of change I could scrounge together. But super cool, completely out of place in this lineup of fish, but for Helen, I would do it.
Thank you.
So and that's kind of how we would come up with the drawings. There's 8 or 9 other ones in there. In the book, she also tells really cool like folk tales of fish from around the world, and I would add a small kind of spot illustration each one. And those are a lot of fun to read. But yeah.
Cool.
And that's pretty much that. That's how it all comes about.
Sweet.
Late nights, a lot of coffee, and sitting there and, hoping she likes it.
I do. I really do.
Yeah.
So much. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I think we're done.
Cool. There you go.
Okay, well, I will say thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you so much to AJ for being here and sharing insights that no one else has had before. I think that was exclusive world first of the art of Eye of the Shoal. So thank you, thank you so much for coming and enjoying our fish world. Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from anyone in the room?
Q&A. Anyone?
No worries. If
We
you need
have
to
a
get
few
off.
questions on the dory.
Yeah.
I'll read one of the questions from the dory. So
Oh,
we have
cool.
online questions from
Okay.
the live stream. I am interested to know how fishes pick their partners in the wild. Are they generally monogamous? And also, what is your favorite fish?
Oh, the favorite fish question I love. I've had it like 4 times now from kids and adults, and it's really hard to answer because there's 30,000 species to choose from.
Yeah.
So I kind of have a daily favorite. At the moment, I think my favorite is a thing called a mandarin fish, which is one of 2 animals in the world that have the blue pigment in them. Every other blue is a structural color. So butterfly wings, it's the same reason that the sky is blue and that rainbows are blue. It's the sort of physical interaction with the structure of the material, not a pigment. And the only blue pigments have been found in these beautiful fish, which also I think they are not monogamous, but the males dance each night for the females, and they have this wonderful kind of display. So the female will choose the male based on his, colors and dancing abilities. So often it is the males in the fish that are having to show off to the females. And the females will choose. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the chapter I write about color, talking about guppies and how they have evolved to be incredibly colorful, but it's a real trade-off between sex and danger. And in their native habitats in Trinidad, in the Caribbean, they live in these little pools that have different levels of danger. Some of them have loads of predators and some of them don't. And in the pools with, scientists basically realized that the pools with predators had less colorful fish in than the ones that were safe. And then experiments show that it only takes about 18 months in captive conditions and controlled conditions to change their colors. So you take away the predators and they evolve, and the kind of generations become more colorful because you don't want to be bright and sort of stand out if there's things that are going to eat you. But you want to be colorful enough for a female to come and mate with you. So there's this sort of trade-off between the two. And some fish are monogamous, aren't they? I mean, seahorses, I think, pair up for life, and various others. I think some of the cichlids do as well. I think that can be quite good at staying in their partners, sort of partnerships, male, females. And one of my favorites actually is a thing called the chalk bass, I believe, and they're hermaphrodites, but they pair up for life, and then about 20 times a day just flick between the genders and like kind of swap over male, female, male, female. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Any other questions?
So thanks for sharing insight into these animals. A lot of them we would never get to see otherwise. But actually seeing them in person is really super cool. And I'm assuming based on your photography that you've done some diving. And I think you mentioned that you were diving.
Yep.
Is there like a favorite place you've dove, or like a dream location that you would want to dive, or someplace you'd recommend that people check out?
I certainly do. I don't know if you do.
I do. You go first.
So yeah, I do dive, and it's really how I got into all of this in the first place. I learned to dive when I was a teenager in England, which definitely wasn't clear and beautiful and full of lots of fish, but it got me into it anyway. And but since then I've worked and researched and dived all around the world, which has been wonderful. But actually, when I was writing the book, I had a chance to go on a big, long trip around the world. I was actually, first port of call was here in California, and AJ and I met a couple of years ago for the first time, which was great. And then we carried on, my husband and I carried on traveling around the world and did as much diving as we could and watching fish and kind of just getting ideas for this book. And the final place we dived is a place I've wanted to go for a really long time, which is the island of Palau in the Pacific, which is it's sort of, if you flew from here to Guam and then you carry on another one, it's sort of out that way. And I'd always heard about Palau as being like the scuba divers' heaven. It's now very strongly protected from overfishing. The reefs are meant to be beautiful. And I had hugely high expectations for it and was kind of nervous that whether it would fulfill that. This was 2016 when there was a big heat wave. There was coral bleaching going on all over the world. Palau had been hit by a drought. But it was fantastic. It was absolutely blew me out of the water. Just big, old, beautiful fish that I hadn't seen for years, or really ever in that kind of density. A fish I studied for my PhD, which in the location I studied it at in Malaysia, ended up being fished out and they'd all gone. But I saw them in Palau, these things called humphead wrasse, in huge numbers. The reefs are beautiful and just extraordinary place for just like, sort of heaven under the sea, really. So yeah, definitely go there.
So I mentioned I dove at the aquarium of the Bay for a couple of years as a professional diver. Then I dove at Cal Academy in Golden Gate Park and all those tanks. I even dove at the Rainforest Cafe as a job for a short minute, which was pretty miserable, but paid the bills for a while. And I got certified when I was 16, and growing up in Sacramento, I was so obviously fish obsessed and obsessed with the ocean that I would dive in the American River, which ran through my suburban neighborhood of kind of Carmichael. And you can imagine it was dreary and super cold and high current, and I wouldn't be able to see you, about 5 or 6 feet visibility. But we would get we'd get striped bass swimming in from the ocean, and we'd get shad, and if I was super lucky, I'd maybe see a sturgeon, but there was a couple times I thought I saw like the big tail of one that I had startled as I came up on it, you know, which also startled me, because anytime when you're in dark, murky water and something big comes at you, there's always a moment. So in some ways, those kind of crummy dive spots where I'm like going through like shopping carts and like I-beams of the old bridge that I'm diving underneath and all that kind of stuff are actually really nostalgic and, you know, kind of part of my favorite spots. Of all the spots I've dove from the Philippines to Monterey and Mexico, like Cozumel and stuff, my all-time favorite is Catalina Island. So an hour boat ride out of Long Beach, and there's literally like an oceanic paradise. For me, the best California diving, it's warm enough that you don't feel like you're gonna die after half an hour of being underwater. But because it's still temperate waters, you know, it's mid-60s, you get a lot of the cool cold water species, and you also get kelp forests. And the visibility there is much better than Monterey, which generally is, on the best day, 10 or 15 feet. Catalina could be as much as 40 or 50, super blue, and like cathedrals of giant kelp coming up and over. Giant black sea bass, the size of cars almost, at least they look like it when they come up on you. Leopard sharks breeding and cruising around in the kelp. Occasionally blue sharks and soupfin sharks, smooth hound, giant balls of anchovies that are the size of a house that just block out the sun. So that's my all-time favorite spot, but I haven't been to as many spots as she has.
I haven't been
So,
to Catalina, I need to.
We'll see, there you
go.
go.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Cool.
Cool.
Right on, guys.